Sophie sat in the quiet of her living room, the emptiness around her a reminder of the life she once had with David. It had been 3 months since his sudden death, and every day felt like a struggle to keep going. His things were still scattered around. The chair he always sat in, his favorite mug on the kitchen counter, but nothing felt real without him. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She picked it up absent-mindedly, not expecting anything important. But when she saw the name on the screen, her heart stopped. It was a message from David's number. She blinked, not sure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. There was no way. He was gone. It must be a mistake. She tapped the message open with trembling fingers. It was simple. "I'm still here." Her stomach dropped. She stared at the screen, feeling a chill run through her. Couldn't be real, but deep down, something in her wanted to believe it was. Sophie couldn't stop thinking about the message. "I'm still here." It didn't make sense. David was gone, yet there it was on her phone. The next day, another message came through. She didn't even have to look at the number to know it was from him. "I miss you too." Sophie's hands shook as she read the words. She couldn't deny how familiar they felt, like something David would say. But how? How was this possible? She showed the messages to her best friend, Emma, hoping for an explanation. Emma frowned. "Sophie, it's just your grief. You're probably imagining things." But Sophie wasn't sure. These messages didn't feel like a mistake. They felt real, too real. The messages kept coming. Each one was more personal, more specific. Sophie couldn't ignore them anymore. She didn't know what to believe, but she knew one thing. David was somehow reaching out to her. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The messages from David kept coming. She needed to understand how this was happening. The next day, she went to the phone store, hoping for some answers. The clerk looked at her like she was crazy when she asked about her husband's number. "It's deactivated," he said, looking at his screen. "There's no way it could be sending messages." Sophie felt her heart race. How could that be? If his number was deactivated, who was sending these texts? She left the store in a daze, her mind racing. Was it possible someone had hacked his number? Or was it something else entirely? That night, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message was simple. "I'm still watching over you." Sophie shivered. She didn't know what to believe anymore, but one thing was clear. The messages weren't stopping, and neither was her need to find out why. As the days passed, the messages from David grew stranger. They no longer felt like words of comfort. They started to hint at something deeper, something unsettling. One evening, Sophie received a message that made her stomach drop. "The truth about my death is out there. You need to look." Sophie stared at the screen, her heart pounding. What did that mean? Her husband's death had always seemed like an accident. But now, with these messages, she began to wonder. Was it really an accident? The next day, Sophie searched through old papers and phone records, desperate to find something. She found an unfamiliar number in David's contacts, one he had never mentioned. It was a clue, but it raised more questions than answers. Sophie's mind raced. Was her husband hiding something from her? And why was he telling her this now? The messages continued, pushing her to uncover more. But each answer only led to more mystery. Sophie was determined to find out the truth, no matter where it took her. Sophie couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious number she'd found in David's phone. She decided to trace it, hoping it would lead her to some answers. After a few calls and some digging, she discovered the number belonged to a man named James, someone David had worked with before. Sophie had never heard of him. She reached out to James, her voice shaking as she introduced herself. James was hesitant at first, but when Sophie mentioned David's name, he agreed to meet. At the cafe, James looked nervous. He told Sophie things she wasn't prepared to hear. David had been involved in something dangerous before his death. There were people who might have wanted him gone. Sophie's mind spun. All this time, she thought it was an accident, but now it seemed like something much darker was at play. James handed her a piece of paper with a name on it. Look into Richard Holt. Sophie had never heard of him, but she knew this was the next step in finding out what really happened to David. The messages from David kept coming, each one leading her closer to the truth. But now, Sophie wasn't sure if she was ready for what she might uncover. Sophie tracked down the man, James, from David's phone. He told her that David had been mixed up in something dangerous before his death. There are people who wanted him gone, James said, looking worried. James gave Sophie a name, Richard Holt, and told her to look into it. The truth about David's death was starting to unfold, and Sophie realized it wasn't an accident. The messages from David kept coming, pushing her to find out more.